PoE Activity 2. Let's start with the instructions on the PoE. So this activity requires you to develop a differentiated lesson for the 3 groupings of learners that you developed as a class during Learning Unit 3. I've already spoken about this, that we have decided, or not decided, that we have to focus on the different ability groupings. So you will remember that we have spoken about that in our previous session on CoLab on the 7th of October. So we need to focus on how we will meet our group's needs. And we need to explain the learning differences between our 3 groupings of learners. And in this instance, we will have groups of learners who comes from different home languages, learners with ADHD, math anxiety, gifted learners, socioeconomic status, and abilities. And for this particular activity, for this PoE, we need to focus on the 3 ability groupings that we are going to have in our class with the topic problem solving for this lesson. Right, so remember that we said we are going to focus on the 3 ability groupings, which will be then the high skills and the moderate skills and the low level. All right, so we are going to focus on that. A grade 7 class, remember, grade 7 that we focus on in this semester with the 3 ability groupings. And to help you with that, you can go to that guidelines to responding to learner diversity, which is also filed on VC Learn to help you with the 3 ability groupings. So it's not going to be mixed abilities. You are going to tell us that one is a low skills, the other group has got moderate skills, and the last group has got high skills in problem solving when we do rate. So remember, I have already said this before, that for each lesson you decide how you would group your learners if you want to group them, and you will always move around the group members. It's flexible groupings, so it depends on which lesson you want to prepare or you are preparing, and then you decide on how you would group your learners. Right, so that is done now. You know the 3 ability groupings, and you know that it's going to be for grade 7. Our topic is problem solving, where we compare 2 quantities of different kinds, and we call that rate. So your lesson has to focus on rate and how to problem solve, how to do problem solving. So this activity differs from all the other activities that you have done so far on developing or creating lessons, in the sense that it is a bigger lesson. It's a unit lesson. So there are 3 lessons in this series, and I'm going to explain to you exactly how you have to tackle this. And then you also need to use the 5 strands of mathematical proficiency that are developed over the 3 lessons. So you need 1 lesson plan for all 3 the lessons, and we call that a unit plan. So in the lesson plan itself, I will show you where you have to do which lesson. The first lesson will be as the intro lesson, and the second lesson will be as the body or the teaching and learning phase lesson, and the third lesson will be your closure lesson. All right, so within those 3 lessons, which is all developed and created on 1 lesson plan, it has to show progression. So from your intro to your teaching and learning phase to your closure phase, you need to show the progression in the unit plan. Then you also need to use all 5 of Kilpatrick Kilpatrick's strands of mathematical proficiency and how they are developed over the series of the 3 lessons. So if you remember, and you can refer to chapter 4 of Kilpatrick, remember that is the document also filed for you on VC Learn. The strands of mathematical proficiency is discussed in chapter 4 of that document. And that, if you remember, those will be conceptual understanding, the concept rate, what is it? In other words, you could do this in your intro phase to establish what your learner's prior knowledge is about rate, and then you can also introduce what is rate. So that can be a whole lesson on the concept and the procedural fluency, where you start practicing with rate. In your intro lesson, you can use both those strands. So in your actual teaching and learning phase lesson, you can use procedural fluency again, and then strategic competence, where you indeed use problem solving as a teaching strategy. Also, adaptive reasoning also is around problem solving. And then the productive disposition, where you give them meaningful, relevant, real-life problems to solve relating to rate. And then you can also end off your whole unit plan with giving them real-life examples or real-life problems that they have to solve. Right, so the instructions are as follows. Develop one lesson plan, which will contain the information and directions for all 3 of the lessons in the series. This is called a unit plan. So you are only going to use one lesson plan. You're going to use your template, and you are only going to do one lesson plan. And you are going to elaborate in the section, the introduction section, the body of the lesson, and the conclusion of the lesson to have the 3 lessons. So if we can say the blue indication here is your first lesson, then the green one is your second lesson, and the orange one will be your 3rd lesson. So in the introduction to the lesson, that is your entire first introductory lesson, complete with activities that you will do with them in this lesson. Remember now, it's not going to only be 5 minutes. You can now have 30 minutes to do an introductory lesson with your learners. It's an entire lesson. Then in the body of the lesson, which is your second lesson, you will cement together your concepts with activities again. All right, so if we refer to the strands of mathematical proficiency, this is where you will practice the rate and problem solving. So procedural fluency, strategic competence, and adaptive reasoning, and even productive disposition can be done in the body of the lesson. And then in the conclusion of the lesson, which will be an entire 3rd lesson, you will tie up the concepts, and you will have activities and a differentiated assessment. All right, so that is done in the 3rd lesson of this unit plan. So remember, one lesson plan template. In the introduction, you will have an introductory lesson, which will be 30 minutes. In the body of the lesson, you will have the second lesson, which will also be 30 minutes. And in the conclusion part, you will have your 3rd lesson, which will also be 30 minutes. And all 3 of those lessons should have activities. And remember, by activities, we do not necessarily mean worksheets. It can be any activity, any learning experience for your learners. So your lesson plan will therefore be a lot longer than normal because it includes information for all 3 lessons. So just to recap, it should be a differentiated lesson plan. In other words, you should show me how you will differentiate your whole lesson, your whole introductory lesson. How will you differentiate it so that you include all three groups of learners? Right, it should be for grade 7, and it should be about rate, problem solving. There should be 3 lessons within this lesson plan. You should indicate where you are going to use Kilpatrick's strands, and it should be 1 lesson plan with 3 lessons inside. So here I've already indicated for you how to use your strands of mathematical proficiency. So in your introduction, you will introduce the concept and make sure that they understand the concept. So that's conceptual understanding with activities for them to do. In the body, that's your teaching and learning phase, you are going to cement the concepts with activities. So this is focused on procedural fluency. You're going to practice it with examples. And if you incorporate problem solving here, you will also incorporate some of the other strands here. And then in the conclusion, when you tie up the concepts, you will have a differentiated assessment as well, and that will have all 5 strands within the conclusion part of your lesson. Right, so let's just look at our lesson plan template. You will remember how it looks. This is how it looks. So the date of the lesson, the grade 7, number of learners, say for instance 30. The duration will then now be 90 minutes because you have 3 lessons. The subject, which subject is it? Mathematics. The topic will be problem solving, rate. Let's just go back to that. Comparing two quantities of different kinds, and it will be rate. So if you are going to do, say for instance, speed, you can also include which topic you have used for speed. So you really have to consult your CAPS document. So the first sections, section A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, will be the same for all 3. So you are only going to do this once. All right. So you're not going to complete a separate lesson plan for each lesson. This is only going to be done once. But remember, in section F and in section G, you need to explain the learning differences between your 3 ability groupings, and you need to explain how you will meet their needs with the different teaching strategies that you are going to use to meet the needs of the different learners. If we look now at section H, this is now going to be a lot longer than your usual lesson plans. So the introduction phase is lesson 1. The teaching in and learning phase is lesson 2. And the closure phase and assessment is lesson 3. All right. So remember, this is your mathematical strands of mathematical proficiency. So make sure that you incorporate them in all 3 lessons. All right. So in lesson 1, you are going to introduce the concept. So it will be conceptual understanding. You are going to engage with them, and you are also going to establish their prior knowledge. You need to mention in this lesson, in this lesson, you need to also mention how you are going to use the teaching strategies to scaffold the concepts and how the learners are going to be actively involved in the scaffolding of their knowledge. You need to explain to me what you are going to do. And then you also need to describe the activities or include the worksheets that you are going to do for this lesson for 3 groups. Then in lesson 2, the same story. It's a whole lesson. So you need to describe this teaching strategy, so what the teacher is going to do, what the learners are going to do, what activities they are going to do, or worksheets for 3 groups. And then in the end, the last lesson, also the teaching strategies, you're going to recap the key points and you are going to form a link to the next lesson, whatever that will be. Make sure your learners are active in the scaffolding of their knowledge. Also, the 3 groupings and assessment for the 3 groups. So please remember, it is not 3 worksheets here, 3 worksheets here, 3 worksheets here, and 3 assessments. No, it's activities, learning experiences. All right, so if you want to do a worksheet, yes, you can. But otherwise, you need to describe to me what you are going to do with your 3 different groups, whether it is stations or chat stations, discussions, activities for them, different activities for them to do at different stations. Whatever you are going to do is up to you, but you have to make sure that you differentiate and that you do 3 lessons in this lesson plan. Right, if you look at the rubric, you will see that your section A is only once. Your CAP-specific aims is also the same aims for all 3 lessons, so it's also only once. Your objectives for the lesson will also be the same for all 3 lessons, so only once. So you write all the objectives that you want to introduce or do in the 3 lessons. You write down at the objectives of the lesson. The curriculum integration also just once, and the learners, the consideration of the learners also once by explaining the learning differences. Remember, this should also be a very you have to describe this very well. So you can't just say, I'm going to group them in 3 groups. You have to elaborate on the discussion. That was the word I was looking for. So elaborate on what and why. Then the teaching strategies and differentiation as well. You need to explain how you will meet their different needs. And remember, people, this is very important, where you have to tell us the best way to teach this content to these learners. Please, not the generic killing quotes. You should make it applicable to this lesson. So your discussion about your teaching strategy. Tell me in your own words, why did you choose this teaching strategy for this content for these learners? All right, so I just want to quickly recap this part. Section A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, you only do once. So if we look again at our rubric, you will see part A is the routine information, which is done once. The CAP-specific aims, the objectives, the integration, the consideration of the learners, and the teaching strategies. That is only done once. All right, so that stays like it was always done, like you always did it. Sorry, this part of your lesson plan. So when we get to the lesson steps in the introductory phase, the teaching and learning phase, the closure phase and assessment, this is going to be much longer. So this introductory phase is going to go over 1 page, even 2 pages, because you need to describe the whole lesson there in your introductory phase. So in your introduction for each lesson, you will have an introduction. So for lesson 1, you will need an introduction. Then you also need teaching steps, because you need a teaching strategy to explain the concept to them. And then you also need a conclusion. You need activities, and you need the learners and the teacher to be actively involved in the scaffolding of their knowledge. So these are applicable to all three your lessons. So only for lesson 1 will you have an introduction. In lesson 2, you will not really introduce rate again to them because they already now know that you are busy doing rate. Okay, so then you do teaching steps, learner centering, conclusion. You give me activities that you are going to do for lesson 2. And then in the conclusion phase, you also describe the teaching steps, describe what the learners are going to do, describe how you are going to end off this lesson, and describe the activities. Right, so it is actually 3 activities or 3 lessons in one. That is what you should do. So for the lessons itself, please read through your rubric. This is why we give you the rubric. Read through this column. The lesson is introduced in a logical and engaging manner, so learners know what to expect and what is expected of them. Prior knowledge is established in an engaging way. So this is applicable to your first lesson. That's why I say it's not really applicable. An introduction is not applicable to the second and the third lesson because you have already established their prior knowledge about rate. And then in your conclusion, you don't have to include a conclusion, for lessons 1 and 2 because they say key points are clearly recapped and linked to the next learning, which will be done in the third lesson because then you will tell them what they will do in the next lesson after this whole long hour-and-a-half lesson. All right, the activities exactly match the targets to be achieved. The activities are relevant and appropriate for South African children in the intermediate phase. Here it is senior phase because it's grade 7. All right, remember the focus is on grade 7. So people, the most important thing is that I should be able to see in each of the 3 lessons how you as the teacher differentiate your lesson, your teaching, not only in the activities that they do, but how you differentiate your lesson as a teacher. All right, so in the explanation here, you need to be very thorough because you're not only going to get marks if you give me 3 worksheets. All right, you can't just give me 3 worksheets. You need to give activities for 3 groups in each and every lesson. Because if you look at this rubric, the worksheets and the activities is a separate section. So you need to have activities. You earn marks for this. All right, so you need to explain what you are going to do in that lesson. Are there any questions about this activity?